I don't remember the equatorial group with very much pleasure, actually, because all those steps up and down and those cobbles and the pond made a series of hazards that were not very good for a bloke who was walking around with sticks. I did use the 13-inch.
The astrographic.
The astrographic. And I also used the 30-inch, the Coude spectrograph.
Okay.
I used that. That was a very sedentary, that was a very gentlemanly telescope, because the starlight's brought a little table where you can sit. The Husbands is a very frustrating sight for an astronomer, because the sky is so variable. It's very difficult to set out on a program to do something with any confidence that you'll get through it. And that was one of the reasons why we decided to concentrate on spectroscopy in the work that we did there, because the fact that the transparency changes as thin clouds drift by and the starlight sort of varies up and down, it affected your efficiency. You weren't working at 100% efficiency, but you could nonetheless, by taking longer, achieve things. And people kept an eye on the weather while there was observing going on, and some people were notorious for looking out at the sky and thinking, "Man, it's a bit ropey now. I think I'll turn in, around about midnight when you're getting tired." In fact, the Astronomer Royal was notorious for that. All the seeing used to go bad always around midnight, and he'd stride down the hill back to his apartment. It's said that the reason for the rule that was insisted on, that while men could observe on their own at the telescopes, women had to observe in pairs, was that the Astronomer Royal's wife was somewhat concerned about the Astronomer Royal being up there with young ladies at night, and so insisted that there should be, as it were, each girl should chaperone the other. I'm sure it's scandalous gossip.
I know you're very associated with the Yap telescope and Dome B at the equatorial group. There's a big cupboard in that dome with St Paul's Cathedral written over it.
Oh right, that's
Would that be anything to do with you?
Yeah, that's me. I was in charge of the Yap telescope for a while.
Right.
When Alec Boxenberg was testing and setting up the so-called IPCS.
Right.
Which is a detector that superseded photographic material for detecting starlight. And that was operated from a console which was off to one side. The dome was bare. The console would just be standing out in the open, and the electronic equipment couldn't stand being in the cold air.
Right.
So there had to be some kind of enclosure, some kind of room, cabin, for this thing to stand in. And so I had made that cabin, I made it serve two purposes. So one, it housed the equipment, and the other thing was there's a ladder up onto the roof, so you could stand on the roof and you could get access to the top end of the telescope. You took the telescope down, stand on the roof of this little building and do things. So that's the other side. I didn't know it was called St Paul's Cathedral, but that's clearly me. One of the things the students always did, each student group, as it were, was kind of challenged by the permanent staff there towards the end of their 6 or 8 week stay to play some practical joke. And one joke I remember was an enormous great bed sheet was painted up with a smiley face, and it was hung from the balcony of the Isaac Newton telescope looking down towards the west building, so that they had a dome and then there were two eyes and a big grin, so the whole thing looked like this big beaming face looking down over the valley. And that was one practical joke I remember. But another practical joke was there was an astronomer who had, in fact it was Hazelhurst, John Hazelhurst, but he had a car, which was an upright Morris. You remember Morris cars used to be they looked a bit like Model T Fords, sort of erect sort of car.
Sure.
I mean, it was old even when he had it, and quite small. And the rest of the students discovered that this car fitted on the drawbridge. If you picked it up, and staggered up the steps onto the drawbridge, and then turned it round. You could just drop it down between the walls. The length of the car was exactly the same as the width between the walls. So they then put it down on the bridge between the walls. Of course, you couldn't go backwards and forwards and do a multi-point turn and back it out. The only way it could be got out was to lift the whole thing up. So, I mean, there were, I forget, maybe 10 or a dozen students on the course, so 10 or a dozen of them standing around the car could pick it up and put it down. But certainly not one individual or two. So they did this halfway through the evening while the Astronomer Royal was at the Equatorial Group. So when it came time for him to leave, for whatever reason it was, he walked down the hill and got to the drawbridge and found his way completely blocked by this car that he couldn't get out. He stormed round to the side entrance in a fury, and he got the night watchman to go and get the students. Were all, by that time it's midnight or so, they were all by that time tucked up in bed in the attics, in the bedrooms along the top of the castle. And I remember the night watchman going along this corridor, banging on the doors. All students to the bridge, he would say. All students to the bridge. It was a kind of a naval command somehow. It just fitted in with the ambience of the place absolutely perfectly. And the students all had to put their clothes on and go down and lift the car off the bridge so that the astronomer could go to bed. Well, after that, I was out in Australia for 3 years,
right,
with a telescope that was 150 inches in aperture, biggest telescope in the southern hemisphere at the time, and it was virtually impossible to point it at the sky without discovering something. So I was in Australia for 3 years. I used the telescope for 150 nights out of those 3 years.
Wow.
And I published about 150 papers, so roughly one paper per night's observations. I mean, but it was all the same, it was all in the same mode. It was all trying to recognise in the optical sky some feature that had been identified, flagged up by X-ray astronomers or by radio astronomers. I mean, when I came back to Hurstman-Sue, after Australia, the move to La Palma was in full tilt, and clearly La Palma is a superior place to do astronomy. I mean, there are some arguments about whether or not it would have been a good thing to leave the telescope there and to build a new telescope rather than spending the money on moving the old one. There is an argument in that direction, but it was also a scientific management issue that if the Isaac Newton telescope had remained at Hurstman-Sue, then the observatory would have concentrated on its homegrown telescope in Sussex and not given the right attention to the potentially much better science generating facility in the Canaries. And so as a matter of scientific management, I think that was the factor which swayed the decision towards the moving part of it. Well, yeah, any death is a tragedy, isn't it? And we had, I mean, I remember when we moved, when the RGO was moved from Hurstman-Sue to Cambridge, we had a sort of a big festive opening sort of week, and there were newspapers around, and radio and TV, and I remember saying, boasting to somebody, we have 400 years of history behind us, and here at Cambridge we have 400 years of history in front of us. It was more like 4 years than 400. So I couldn't have been more wrong. Couldn't have been more wrong. I think we, the people at the RGO, are somewhat to blame. Our destiny was in our own hands. There was a challenge that was thrown down in front of us to become this dynamic technology developing institute, and to some extent we responded to that challenge, but not enough. And the price that we were charging for that was too high. And some products don't work. Some products are too expensive. It's the marketplace of science. So I think it's a tragedy from the point of view of I didn't like to see the RGO shut down at all. I hated it. But I'm a scientist, and I want to produce the most science possible, and I want the best science possible. And I think that the decision that was made was understandable. Well, the person that I remember with great fondness and now great sadness is Michael Penster, a brilliant man, brilliant astronomer, a student like me on the student course. He married Margaret Penster, whom I think you're interviewing at some point. He died unexpectedly and early. He also studied black holes, but black holes within galaxies, so-called supermassive black holes. And he made several key discoveries, including the way one kind of galaxy changes into another as a result of the activity that there is around this black hole. So-called Seifert galaxies change types. And he published the first paper on that topic from the Isaac Newton telescope. It was the first paper that was published in its new home in Palma. And he was very well known, very well respected, and it was a very good friend. And I would say it's a good friend and a kind of a rival. I mean, we were identical ages. Had our career paths have been very similar. We were both of us trying to make our careers, so we were kind of rivals, friendly rivals, I think, and found sure. And I still miss him from time to time.